Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. A warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session today. My name is Ella Stopford-Sackville, and I'm part of the Women's Forum editorial team. And I'd like to introduce today our moderator for our session, Danae Kyriakopoulou, who will be leading a conversation on women's leadership driving an inclusive recovery. To follow and engage with the session on social media, please use the hashtags #Women4Inclusion, #WFGM20. We invite you to also ask questions to the speakers in the chat during the session. If possible, the moderator will look to bring these questions into the conversation. So without further ado, Danae, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to moderate this panel, and we have three excellent speakers today, three deputy governors from central banks. So we have Monique Nsanzabaganwa from the National Bank of Rwanda. We have Alessandra Perrazzelli from the Banca d'Italia, the Central Bank of Italy, and also Carolyn Wilkins from the Bank of Canada, the Canadian Central Bank. Welcome to you all, and I'm very excited because there's very few of you. There's very few women in central banks, in the higher echelons of central banks, let's say. So we do a research piece every year looking at that, and only 14 out of 173 central banks are headed by women globally, and only 61 have at least one woman deputy governor. So you are a minority, and it's great to see you and to discuss with you and so many people. It's important to show role models as well as part of that. I was reading in the New York Times yesterday, that is a media partner for this conference, the interview of Christine Lagarde, who is of course a very important role model in this area as well. And she was saying in her experience as a woman central banker, how she thinks women can bring a different perspective to central banking and champion different issues as well. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion. But let's start with you, Carolyn. The COVID crisis has affected men and women differently. Men, of course, on the science side are affected more by the disease itself. That's what the statistics and the science show us. But women are perhaps more affected by the economic and financial impact and the social impact of the pandemic. When we look at risks to unemployment, to having more burden in terms of childcare and homeschooling, as well as domestic violence and so many other issues that are affecting women's lives differently during this period that we're going through. What do you see the role of central banks to be in this? Central banks set policies differently, savers and borrowers differently, but also different groups in society, such as women perhaps. What has been the response from the Bank of Canada and your experience as a central banker in reviewing these changes to the economic realities by women?
Well, thank you very much, Danae, and thank you so much to the Women's Forum for the invitation. It's just fantastic to be on this panel with my international colleagues. You know, there's no doubt that the crisis has hit women harder from an economic point of view, and also other vulnerable groups, people with lower incomes. And when we think about it, if we're honest, even before COVID, we weren't in necessarily the best position anyways. Globally, women make up, I guess their labor force participation is about 2/3 that of men, and it's been flat over many years. And women also have lower incomes across many countries, and COVID just made that worse. And in fact, it was pretty predictable. We knew it was going to happen the moment businesses closed and layoffs occurred, and of course, from the moment that schools and daycares closed, that it was going to hit women harder. And the numbers speak for themselves. Again, just looking at the global numbers, women make up just under 40% of the global employment, but they accounted for over half of the employment losses. And it's pretty shocking, those numbers, but it's not surprising. And it's because women are more likely to work in high contact industries, the ones that had to shut down because of health measures. And of course, these sectors are affected the most. In Canada, it's no different. There's a lot of talk of a she-cession here instead of a recession or a he-cession. And there's a couple of female economists who I really respect who have been talking a lot about that. And of course, what we all worry about are the immediate job and income losses. But in fact, there's another worry, which is the longer term impacts this is going to have potentially on people, the scarring effects, because these groups, whether it's women, young people, recent immigrants, they're not going to necessarily get integrated again. And so And so clearly, these developments are a big deal for central banks. And you asked me what should we do? Well, of course, our first line of business is to stabilize the economy, do what we can, because we know that recessions are harder on lower income people, and we could do something about that with monetary policy. And so we've been implementing a lot of policies across the globe. They're well known, go from cutting interest rates to large scale asset purchases, but we can't pick where the growth occurs. That's really government policy for sure. That being said, I would argue very strongly that a central bank's role doesn't end with monetary policy and the bluntness of our tools. Central banks can be very bold in terms of raising issues that matter to sustainable and inclusive growth. And we could do this without getting into the politics, but we can highlight things like access to capital, education in STEM, daycare. I did this in a speech that I gave, I guess, a week ago. Second, we can lean into fintech. We have a role there, and fintech is a great avenue to increase inclusiveness, not just for women, but other groups. And then I would say just finally that we can set an example, and we should set an example ourselves in terms of inclusivity. And the Bank of Canada just recently put into place a diversity plan. Part of it sets objectives for women and visible minorities over a 10-year period. And we have publicly called out systemic racism and hate. And so that commitment to an inclusive workplace is quite important for us, and we hope will set an example. I don't think that we're going to get a recovery without efforts for inclusive growth, and we're certainly not going to get a recovery that's sustainable without women.
Thank you, Carolyn. Very interesting. And I'm glad you raised this issue also about central banks not having to be drawn into the politics for this. So let me follow up quickly on that. And because we do hear from time to time criticisms that perhaps that's something that does not fall directly within the remit of central banks. So do you think there is an economic case for diversity and inclusion? Is this something that central banks have to care because of economic considerations or despite economic considerations? Because we do keep hearing about these trade-offs on different economic values and societal and other objectives. For example, is there a trade-off between saving lives and closing down the economy and stopping the economy? How do we think about diversity and inclusion? Does it make business sense? Does it make economic sense?
So it's clear to me that central banks need to do their job, and governments have their own job to do, and we shouldn't be getting into the politics. At the same time, we have an enormous amount of economic talent at central banks. We've got models, we've got economic research, and we actually really care about how inclusive growth is, how strong growth is, how sustainable it is, because it actually matters to the economy. It matters to how easy it is for central banks to do our jobs, and it matters to financial stability, and the evidence to that is building. And so this idea that central banks have no role in discussing from an economics point of view, an analytical point of view, other policies outside monetary policy without being prescriptive, I think is not quite right. And the second point is that there's this conventional wisdom that there's more often than not a trade-off between efficiency and kind of business needs and social needs, and social policy and economic policy. And I disagree entirely. And daycare, I'll just give you one example, public daycare in Canada. The province of Quebec has had public daycare for many, many years. And my son used that daycare when I was living in Quebec. And they went from a province that had one of the lowest female participation rates to now the highest female participation rate, almost as high as men. And if that's not an economic success, I don't know what is.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and great to bring in the statistics as well. I think once you confront people with data, that's when we change our minds, that's when we change our policies. So thanks for bringing in that example as well. Let me turn to you, Alessandra, now, and think a little bit about, we heard from Carolyn how the pandemic is affecting women differently, but when we think about the day after, how do we rebuild after this? How do we lead the economy to recovery? What do you think can be the priorities in terms of building the recovery in a more inclusive way, and how does diversity play into this agenda? In Europe, the European Central Bank and the Eurosystem is not doing as well in diversity. I mentioned Christine Lagarde earlier. She's one of only 2 women on the governing council of the ECB. But of course, you have a lot of diversity in terms of having to bring a lot of countries together with different priorities, different focus. How do you see that as a focus in terms of diversity and inclusion?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very, very pleased to be here with my colleagues from Rwanda, from Canada. Well, first of all, let me tell you one thing. You know, women do have a long-term vision of the world. So I do think that in this, particularly in this crisis, you know, coming from a pandemic like COVID-19, women will have the ability to put together strategies and policies that will carry us forward and will help in also thinking that health, respect for the environment, other issues that are associated with this are going to be part of a new form of growth. And I do have a big trust that this is going to happen. Let me look at some of the issues that also Caroline was talking about in terms of where women are right now and what this pandemic has meant to them. First of all, while I understand that, you know, everything that is being brought onto digital and everything that is related to the use of platforms for work, and also we'll mention that further down, the use of platforms for having access to financial services has definitely been a great way to allow people to be able to work, allow women to be able to work in this time of difficulty. But there's one thing I like to say, is that working from home should not be a substitute for governments to go into a number of measures that will help women in juggling their work and their life. Being at home for women, particularly for women with children smaller than 6 years of age, has proved to be in this pandemic extremely limiting in terms of then progressing further in their career, both in terms of the time, both in terms also their mental health. So first of all, we need to make sure that going forward, if we want to see growth and we want to see an inclusive growth, we need to have a government level, a European level, a global level, those measures that help women in being able to work from home and at the same time dedicate their time, their competence and their skills to the work that they're doing from their home place. Having said that, I think that going digital is also requiring a number of measures that are meant to teach women how to become more digital, and in doing that, how to use the digital way of thinking and way of acting in order to become also more familiar with the financial world. In what we see is that women do think of themselves less skilled, and in many, many ways, they are less skilled than men in using technology in order to foster their financial needs. So that is a very, very important issue for us at the Banca d'Italia. And we have also been trying to push this in the European agenda. We have put together a program that is called Women and Money, that is going to help women, becoming a lot more familiar with the use of technology in order to foster their competence and to become more active in the financial world. And I think that if women can stay in their jobs, and so there is no going down in the numbers of women at work, and if women can use technology in order to use also financial services and to become more active in the world of banking and financial services, that is going to create the base for a more inclusive world in terms of recovering from this pandemic. What we see also is that the new poor in all the countries of Europe are mostly women, and women with small children. Now, this is extremely important also in the way as supervisors, as central banks, we look at the way in which banks are reacting to the demand for credit, the demand for money that comes from households, in addition to those that comes from, of course, companies, and enterprises. Now, there is one thing that I like to say, and it concerns algorithms. I think that we need to be extremely careful that those components that are put together in creating algorithms are actually looked at, understood, and they should not contain elements that are going to create more divide and more discrimination when it comes to women as households and women as an entrepreneur going into banks, and as for that credit that is going to be so important for their survivals as human beings and also as entrepreneurs. I think that this is a very important issue, and we will activate within our bank a number of actions to that extent. At European level, I think that we need to do a lot more in order to have more women in top positions. But when women get there, they have to promote other women. And this is a cultural thing. There are no quotas, there are no laws, there are no other instruments that are mandatory that do work, as well as, the ability for women to promote other women and to make sure that these issues that we mentioned together with Caroline are going to be at the top of the agenda for, the European central banks and for all those other fora where policy making has an impact at global level. And these issues are and have to be at the core of any government and any big organization's agenda.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. And I think it's very important also what you said about other aspects as well, financial inclusion, digital inclusion. How do we make central banks more accountable, more transparent, better communicate with the public that they serve, as they are public institutions and reflect the societies they serve in the end? So could you tell us a little bit about how practically you do that? You mentioned some of the statistics, for example, understanding that women with small children are most hurt. The ECB has also done some innovations in terms of engaging more with civil society. On Twitter, there is this hashtag #AskECB, Q&As that people can talk to central bankers directly, and other central banks, of course, do that as well. There is more public engagement, and over the past decade, central banks have been thrust into the center of the public interest as well. There used to be technocratic institutions tucked away and just doing their work of keeping prices stable, but now they're very much at the front and center of public interest. So how do you, in the Banca d'Italia and in the Eurosystem, lead that dialogue with diverse groups of society, not just with women, but also making sure that you take on board all views? Because so far communication has been mostly with markets. Central bankers speak very often to the financial sector, as makes sense, as you are their supervisors or manage the economy. But how has that dialogue increased to include other parts of society as well?
Well, first of all, if we talk about everything that is connected to financial education, for instance, we have engaged a very interesting conversation with consumer groups, groups that are not only made by women, but also made by those who have a need to understand how the banking world works. And this has been very interesting to see. We just spent the whole month doing this kind of exercises, and we also created a specific department within Bank of Italy that does look at consumers and does an action of supervision of the behavior of banks and non-banks towards consumers that has taken us to communicate more directly with people and not only with institutions. So that would be one thing. The other thing that I like to mention is that, as you probably are aware, the European Commission, and two women in particular, two German women at the European level, have put together a budget for the recovery of those countries that have been hit harder by COVID-19. Well, I like to say that we have moved, I've been part of a group within the bank and outside the bank, so joining forces also with other women in making sure that those projects that are going to be put together at national level are going to be sent to the European Commission in order to be funded by the Recovery Fund. They're going to be projects that are targeted to enhance women's conditions, women work, and everything that is around policies that can help women to come back or to stay in the labor forces. So this has been, I don't know.
About this, you were telling us last week that you wrote a letter to the Prime Minister to urge that to be the focus.
We did, and it was amazing how many signatures we got from within and outside, the civil society, and it was very extremely nice and warm for me to see how much that is shared and how much that is it's really a priority for some, and there were not only women who signed that letter, and that's probably the best result.
Great, thank you. Let me turn to you, Monique. On a more practical level, what do you think are the policies that have worked in your experience? And I mentioned earlier our research into gender diversity in central banks around the world, and actually National Bank of Rwanda is #5 globally, one of the most diverse central banks when it comes to gender diversity in senior leadership. What have been the policies that have worked well? How do you think these are standing up now in the face of COVID? Because it's usually in times of crisis that we test whether systems are central bankers interested in data, in measurements. How has that worked in your experience?
Thank you, Danae. Thank you, Women's Forum, for inviting us. Greetings to everyone. In Rwanda, what has helped nationally, but also at the central bank in particular, is being deliberate about including women as a policy statement, which is read from the Constitution, but also institutions that are charged to monitor that this is happening across government, across private sector, and across civil society. We have a gender monitoring office in government that is really in charge of that. And they have been very active engaging on gender equality in the private sector and in public institutions. Like with the central bank, we are one of the public institutions that have engaged on the gender equality certification, a program that is assessing an institution, identifying gaps, and come up with corrective measures. Something else that has happened is performance-based management, which involves targeting and setting targets that are measurable and harnessing data and reporting on that and demanding accountability based on that. That really has helped a lot to push some progress on a number of issues. So really being deliberate is a key thing, and also demanding accountability. But you mentioned that in crisis, that's where we really get all those systems tested. I think Rwanda is one of the some countries, I don't know how many globally are doing gender budgeting, which is actually spearheaded at the Ministry of Finance. They are in charge of planning and budget, not just the ministry in charge of gender. But when we faced this COVID and had to come up with national recovery programs, the test was in the gender mainstreaming. How do you really make sure that you mainstream gender through relief policies, relief measures, emergency measures? That was not straightforward. But then quite soon we realized that we needed really to recheck. So the gender ministry has done a gender lens assessment of all the programs that have been devised for the recovery, including an economic recovery fund that the central bank manages, and has come up with some recommendations on how we should really be purposeful in making sure that women are not left behind. At the central bank, we implement a program of economic recovery fund on behalf of government, and we engage the financial institutions. The program covers both large companies, SMEs, and micro businesses, and financial institutions, banks, and microfinance institutions, and credit and savings cooperatives can even participate. But it has come rather not straightforward that we are really reaching the right, very right sectors or market segments where women tend to be employed the most, or rather have lost jobs the most. Mainly the informal sector, mainly in sectors like trade, like tourism, like hospitality. Those are the sectors that were employing many, many women. But the program is not really very well targeting those, like directly. So what we are doing to really try and enhance the gender responsive aspect of that is through communication. We are engaging the public a lot, engaging women networks so that they have information and then they can apply. We are engaging financial institutions so that they can put in place teams, empower their staff in the branches on how they can approach or advise their customers. We are really being kind of proactive to demand that, and we have a data warehouse system that is going to be showing us the results as it comes up, but it really has to take a deliberate effort.
Great, thank you very much. And I thought it was really important also what you said about the gender budgeting being part of the finance ministry and gender being at the heart of policy making, because I think in our experience of researching this over a number of years, it's something that should cut across government policy, economic policy. It shouldn't be just the gender department that cares about this. And I think it was also interesting what Alessandra was saying before about how the letter that they wrote was signed not just by women but also by men. So it'd be interesting to hear from you, Monique, how you see the kind of role of men in this as well, and how they can be partners in that agenda, and how diversity can be thought of as something that affects everyone, and how you've implemented that in your policies so far.
The role of men is very crucial. You know, the UN campaign, the He for She, of which our president, His Excellency Paul Kagame, is one of the pioneers, is key. In Rwanda, we have also a program called Men Engage, and we have seen really men going out and raising awareness in the communities, talking to not just men, but also women and couples, and this is really very helpful. At the central bank, we in our process of gender equality certification, we have made sure that we have a standing committee on gender, which I chair, but the membership is both men and women, and it's always good to have position this issue of gender equality and gender equity at the strategic level of an organization. So it's something that we are looking at across the board, but really, men, you need champions. You need for instance, the head of strategy within the bank, whether a man or a woman, has to take this seriously because this is a strategic issue. When it comes to how are we faring in procurement, the head of procurement does need to take this into account seriously. not because he is or she is what she is or he is, but because it's very vital for the institution, but also the outcome in the community is key. My colleagues Carolyn and Alessandra have made the point on how inclusive societies, inclusive economies make our business as regulators, as monetary authorities, very easy. Here in Rwanda, for instance, we are talking of the transmission mechanism, which is working as much as the intermediation is working. And when you have private sector's loans representing just a third of the GDP, and that in that you have women that are like 2/3 of what men are, then there is a gap. So we need to increase intermediation for all and bridge the gap as we do. And this is key to sustain the demand side of the economy so that really the recovery peaks quickly. But also it's also good for the sustainability and the stability of the financial sector when it comes to including everyone in the financial system.
Thank you, Monique. And a reminder at this point to our audience as well that you can send through your questions. And we have a question for you, Monique, really quickly on if we stay with you on the recovery fund that you mentioned and that is targeting women. How do you expect this to work? What do you expect the outcome to be?
Well, I mentioned the Economic Recovery Fund is targeting just the sectors, not women in particular, but we have said to ourselves as a central bank, who are the managers of this fund, that we have to make sure that women are well informed about this. And in our communication strategies, we have made sure that we devise it in a way that is going to reach women where they are. You know, during COVID, everyone has relied on the digital channels for communication, but you know, women tend not to be present in those platforms in the first place. Maybe because of the care work, maybe because of other issues, the cultural norms and so on and so forth. So we need to go an extra mile to know where are the women, how do we reach them best, and with what content. That's really something that we are doing to amplify and make sure that the program is not going to leave women behind. And we have also made sure that it caters for the micro businesses, which was not necessarily the case in the initial thinking of this fund, because we know that women tend to be in those micro businesses. We have made it easy for informal traders, informal business persons to access it with I'll say a proportionate kind of requirements, because we know women are likely to be found in this category of the informal traders. So we are doing it that way, not really targeting women per se, but in our management of the fund, making sure that we are mindful of what women require and how we can be responsive to that.
Great, thank you. I'd like to turn back to the topic of women in leadership and turn to you, Carolyn. There is this argument of the glass cliff that when things get bad, when there are crises, they put the woman in charge and put her up to fail. And that's a way to say, well, let's never do that again. What are your views about this argument? And now we are going through another crisis. Do you think we are at risk of that happening? We have heard the reports and seen the data of some countries that are led by women doing better in COVID and in response to the pandemic. How do you think that will play out as we are perhaps entering another difficult economic period?
So you know, I'm not sure that at least in Canada, that women are put up to fail. What I can say is that there's no reward without risk. So there's no way to change people's view of women that are powerful, that can lead successfully, in technical areas like finance, just as an example, without taking a little risk that you might fail. And I just roll back to my own experience in the spring where Governor Polatz has always been the type of leader that was very supportive of the team. And so he and I were always in a partnership role, and that continues with the new governor. What that meant was I was leading the development of all our liquidity facilities, the 11 of them, and our quantitative easing, in a way that was highly visible to market participants, to my colleagues internationally, and maybe even to some Canadians. And I think the positive thing about that is that people, little girls who just see an image on the television their parents are watching, women in university who are thinking, do I want to do an MA or a PhD in economics? They think, you know, there's somebody. That's what power looks like for a woman. And it's not just, I'm talking about me, but in Canada, we have our chief health officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, is on the news every day. Our health minister is a woman, our deputy prime minister and finance minister is a woman. And so I see this as a very positive thing. And everybody on this line knows that when you have power, you have responsibility. You take that seriously, and there's always the possibility you're going to fail, but that's not a reason to not do it and worry about the glass cliff. That's a reason to take it on with vigor and with conviction.
Thank you. That's very inspiring, and hopefully more women watching us now, and also more little girls will say, well, I want to be a central banker when I grow up. And of course, the statistics are encouraging. We are seeing more women get into economics. And also when you look at the junior ranks of central banks, it's actually more balanced as we go along. You really see that leaky pipeline and fewer women progressing to the very senior levels. I mentioned that you are very few, the three of you, in the global central banking community. And in fact, Carolyn, you will be leaving the Bank of Canada soon. So the statistics will deliberate policies. And she mentioned also the targets and the quotas. And I wanted to get your view on that, because yes, we are getting more balance, and at the junior levels, there are now. Do you think that we will see progress naturally as these become more senior, or do you think it's a more structural problem that needs to be with action? Because sometimes I speak to more junior women, and they say, well, we don't have the quotas, we don't want to have action, we want to be promoted on our merit, on the same basis as men. We don't want positive discrimination in our favor. But then you speak to more senior women who are more in favor usually when I speak to them, and say, well, you're not going to get there without that positive action because the system is set up against, because of all these structural issues. So what is your view about that, Alessandra?
Well, you know, quotas can't be staying there forever. Quotas are a very good way to change the setup, bring more women in the suite, but then you have to continue to foster a diversified environment through a number of different policies. If we look at Italy, we had a law that asked for publicly owned, listed companies and state-owned companies to increment the number of women sitting on the board, and that has brought up the numbers amazingly, and has been an amazing success in our country. Now, is there like a spillover effect from that position onto management positions, for instance, in companies? We haven't seen that happening. So clearly quotas do have a sort of like breaking through, effect, but they need to be accompanied by a different culture in the workplace, a culture that says simply that women are customers, women do manage their own money, women do have a very active role in buying everything from, financial services onto real estate. So we need more women that are able in strategic positions to cater for that environment, for that consumer. So I think that we still have a lot to do. I always feel that as a senior woman in an institution, the best thing that I can do is to promote women in my institution, make sure that they get up and they get promoted, that they get exposed also to change. And we have lots of women at entry level, and that I think is less of a problem today than it was years ago. But we do have an issue where women start to have more responsibilities and they become, closer to the real power of either a company or an institution. And that's where I think senior women have a role to play. And I agree with Caroline. It's very inspiring. And I do hope that today we have some young women watching this and taking some, something to bring home with them and look at themselves in a way they want to, be looked at by others, even though it doesn't seem to be simple or easy. And I wish that, I really wish that may happen even today with us.
Thank you, Alessandra. We are coming to the end, just a couple of minutes left, but I'd like to give the final word to you, Monique, and ask a question about the role of the private sector here, because we've spoken a lot about the role of central banks as public bodies. Do you think it should be up to the governments mostly and public institutions to address diversity and inclusion because it is a market failure in some ways? Or what do you see the role of business, the role of the private sector, and how do you as a central bank work with them in your role as supervisors in some ways? This was also a question from the audience about the role of private sector and the business. We are coming to the end anyway, so I'll close the session in that case. Thank you very much to all three of you. Very, very inspiring conversation, and also very important to see that it is grounded in data as well. It makes in this to ensure that the recovery that we're seeing from this pandemic is inclusive and puts diversity at its heart as well. Thank you very much for giving your time to us today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Danae. Thank you, Alessandra, Carolyn, Monique. Thank you for that wonderful conversation. Thank you to our audience for joining and for sharing your questions. We've got a great afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, still to come on the Women's Forum program. So please go back to the main homepage to access the next set of live sessions. Thank you to our speakers, and see you all soon.